Now it's time to learn double knitting. The first part about double knitting is edge stitches. You're going to have an edge stitch you work at the beginning and an edge stitch you work at the end. The edge stitches comprise of two of the yarns held together, whereas when we double knit, each one of these loops here is going to be treated independently. But the two edge stitches comprise two loops each. To work the edge stitches as I have described in the pattern, the very first stitch is always going to be put the yarn in front, slip as if to purl, and then take the yarn to the back. Let me show you that again. Back up. When you go to do your very first edge stitch, you want the yarn to be in front. You're going to slip that edge stitch from right needle to left needle as if to purl, and then you'll take the yarns together to the back and go between the needles and to the back. And now you're set up to do your double knitting. I typically double knit with a yarn held in each hand. You can do this with the yarns held in the right hand or the yarns held in the left hand. There is also a little finger guide you can use so that if you want to hold the two strands together, you can clip them into a finger guide and it'll keep them separated on the right fingers or left fingers, whichever hand you want to try it on. But I do it right hand, left hand, just like I would do with Fair Isle knitting. So if you have experience doing some Fair Isle knitting, you could try it out that way, or I'll show you the steps to do it with each hand, and then I'm going to start with putting it in both hands. So once we've done our edge stitch, the very first thing to do is decide which one of your yarns is going to be the main color or the contrast color. In the pattern, I have it that the gray yarn is the contrast color and the main yarn is the multicolored Mardi Gras sort of one that you all got. So if you would like to maintain that, it's just fine. In my pattern, it's completely reversible, so you'll be able to use either one. Doesn't matter. But if you do have a pattern that has something that will call for a dominant yarn or a contrast color, main color, go with it. So for this example, I'm going to use gray as the contrast color and red as the main color. To begin, we're going to knit with the main color and purl with the contrast color for this first row. To get this situated, this first row of stitches, we're going to need to sometimes lift over one stitch over the other. Let me get myself straightened out. And you just have to, stick the needle in there and kind of shift it a little bit. I'm making this look way harder than it is. So let me get a little tension change. All right, so you get your needle in there, and you can completely lift it over if you want and get it set up so that you can cleanly knit it, or you can kind of just stick your needle in there somehow. So very first thing we're going to do is we're going to knit a red stitch, slip it off, leaving that pair still on there. Then we move both yarns. Every time we do a stitch in double knitting, we move both yarns. So we're going to move both yarns to the front. We knitted a stitch. Now we're going to purl a stitch because we're working in pairs. Knit, purl, knit, purl. And then I'm going to take the yarns to the back. Next we're going to knit a red stitch. Move the yarns forward. Purl the gray stitch. Take the yarns to the back. Alright, so we're going to keep working across the row. Knit the red. Move the yarns forward. Purl the gray. And that's how I do it with the two yarns. Sometimes I find myself always moving one and moving the other instead of trying to do both at the same time. And I typically move the right, move the left. That's just my mannerisms. You have to kind of figure out what works for you. Now I'm going to show you how to do it with both yarns held in the right hand. Typically I kind of keep a finger in between them and I'll flick one and I'll kind of pick or throw the other. But again, that's how I've figured out how to do it. You kind of work with what you have and what you want to try. So we are going to be knitting the red stitch. So I'm going to kind of shift the red stitch into place, knit the red stitch, take it off the needle, bring both yarns forward, purl just the gray, take both yarns back. Again, we're going to shift the stitches so the red stitch is leading, knit the red stitch, slip it off, bring both yarns forward, and purl the gray stitch. If you're holding it in just your left hand, you can get on there. You can try to keep them a little bit separate, but I do find that when you're double knitting, your yarns are going to kind of twist around each other internally. It's fine. I've never noticed a problem with it. So we're going to knit the red stitch, bring both yarns forward, and then I kind of find I'm isolating one of the strands at a time and kind of doing a throw purl. So knit, pull up a stitch, move both yarns forward. I kind of hold sometimes that thread out of the way. Some of it just depends on the tension. Purl the silver, take the yarns to the back. One more time. Knit the red, move the yarn forward, purl the silver, take it to the back. And if you have the finger guide, it might help for you to be able to pick a little more normally than what I just showed. Finally, we come to the last stitch of the row, and it's always going to be the same in this project. When we finish that silver stitch, we take the yarn to the back, and then we're going to just take that pair of stitches and knit the two together as if they were one stitch with both strands of yarn. And that's the very first row. You can see that we have lined up, and you can pretty much just see all those knit stitches in red. You can see our marbled cast on edge. We have the knit stitches in red, and now I'm going to turn it over, and now the knit stitches are in silver. The reason why is as we're working across, knitting a stitch, purling a stitch, knitting a stitch, purling a stitch, we are working two fabrics at the same time. So the knit stitches on this side are all going to be on the same piece of fabric, and the knit stitches on this side are all going to be on the other piece of fabric. And what's the back side of a knit? A purl.